Hey guys, tonight we open a door not often opened. Not with a bang, but with a creak. You step into a room that smells faintly of lavender, soot, and something sour you can't quite name. The floor creaks beneath your bare feet, and at first glance, there's nothing here. Just a bench, a fire, a pot that simmers without urgency. But if you stay quiet long enough, you'll hear them. The voices, quiet, overlapping, half-laughed, midwives. This story doesn't announce itself. It doesn't have a grand entrance, but if you let it sit with you, it'll slip into your bones like the heat from a stone floor. The forgotten women of childbirth, their fingers stained with the herbs in history, didn't get monuments. They got rumors. They got whispers. And honestly, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's graphic, but because once you see the quiet power these women held, without sword, without title, you'll realize how much history tried to forget them and how bad it failed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you? I promise, someone else is drifting off to this in the same hour. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through wet straw along the edge of a medieval village, lantern in hand, the smell of manure stubborn in your nostrils. There's a flicker ahead, candlelight through wooden shutters. You knock, no answer. You knock again, softer this time. Then the door opens. A woman with deep creases around her mouth motions you inside without a word. Her hands are wet. Her apron is darker than it should be. Something is cooking. Inside, it's warmer than expected. There's a fire, a clutter of clay pots, a half-plucked goose, and a pile of rags that's definitely not laundry. Someone moans in the back room. You don't need to ask why you're here. You're learning, or pretending to. She hands you a cloth. You have no idea what to do with it. Sit there, she says, pointing with her chin. Watch. It's not glamorous. It's not holy. It's messy, loud, and smells of iron and fear. You weren't invited to this world. You were born into it, just like everyone else. Screaming, red, and slippery. But midwives weren't just there to catch babies. They were the keepers of pain, of shame, of secrets. They were the archive no one wrote down. Here, birth is both miracle and disaster. No two deliveries are alike. One woman sings to distract herself. Another swears until she passes out. A third doesn't make it at all. And the midwife? She keeps her hands moving. Always moving. Wiping, folding, tying, whispering. Historians still argue whether medieval midwives had formal training or just winged it with grit and herbal knowledge. The truth, like everything else, lies in a blur of both. Some were taught, some weren't, but all of them carried the same burden. Don't let the mother die, and if the baby dies, don't say too much. You hear her again, the one moaning in the back room. She sounds tired now. The hard part's over, or just beginning. You glance at the elder midwife. She doesn't flinch. She's pouring something into a chipped bowl. It smells like rosemary and something slightly narcotic. That's the thing. Midwives didn't just deliver babies. They brewed teas, applied compresses, fed rumors, carried warnings. They were therapists, healers, and sometimes, accidentally, executioners. One wrong herb, one wrong dose, and a healing tonic turns fatal. On the floor by the hearth is a mortar stained red. Not blood, berries. Maybe, you think. The room pulses with unspoken things. You spot a pouch tucked in a corner, stitched with strange symbols, Christian crosses and what might be a spiral. A charm? A joke? You won't ask. You're here to watch, remember? There's a sudden crash from the back room. A scream. Then silence. Then a baby's cry. Thin, shrill, defiant. And just like that, the midwife exhales. Alive, she says, wiping her brow. This time. You see it then, the weight they carry, because every time is another chance to fail, another death to explain. And in a village of 20 people, everyone knows whose hands were where. A mainstream historical fact here. By the 14th century, most midwives were women, operating with limited tools, linen cloths, sharpened scissors, string to tie off umbilical cords, and maybe a prayer. Some villages pass down a midwife's book, handwritten and smudged, filled with cures like mugwort for turning the child, or basil to stop weeping. But in practice, it was mostly memory and intuition. And gossip. Ah, yes, the gossip. You hear it now, under the breath, behind the cries. She bled too long last time. The father's not her husband. They say she eats the afterbirth. Some gossip was cruel. Some was survival. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Europe, midwives were expected to bury the placenta under a tree to ensure the baby grew strong. If they forgot, the child might grow up hollow-hearted. That's not something you forget lightly, especially when everyone blames you if the child falls ill. As you sit there, still unsure where to put the cloth she handed you, you realize something strange. No one's thanking her. The family is too busy with the baby. The mother is unconscious. The husband is weeping, or maybe relieved. The midwife, she's cleaning, always cleaning. No applause, no credit. Just the quiet knowledge that tonight, nobody died. You glance back at the door. Outside, the wind picks up. But you don't move. Not yet. Because you're starting to understand. This isn't a job. It's a sentence. One they take on willingly. For reasons you don't quite grasp yet. But you will. You wipe your hands on your own apron, still stiff from nerves. And you wait. Because in this world, there's always another knock. Another scream. Another whispered secret traded for fennel root or silence. And if you listen closely, you'll hear them. Not in the books, but in the walls, the floors, the air, the midwives. Still here, still whispering. The scream is fading now, but the echo of it lingers in your chest. That sharp, high note that cuts through firelight and straw. The sound of a life beginning or nearly ending. You didn't realize how long you'd been holding your breath. The elder midwife didn't flinch once. You're not sure if it's experience or exhaustion. You want to ask her how many babies she's delivered, but you don't. Not because it's rude, but because the answer might be worse than the silence. She wraps the infant with the speed of muscle memory, wipes her hands, and moves on. You don't get to bask in miracles here. There's linen to be boiled, tools to be cleaned, floors to scrub before the blood sets in. The birth room, you quickly learn, is not a place of sacred stillness. It's a battlefield. And like all battlefields, it comes with noise. People imagine birth as quiet awe, but that's a lie told by painters. In this world, the sounds are messy. Groans, grunts, muttered prayers, shouted curses, the occasional fart no one dares acknowledge. It's not divine, it's primal. And the midwife? She's the general. You're holding a clay bowl now. You don't know what's in it. It was pushed into your hands without explanation. Maybe something for the mother to drink. Maybe something to wash the baby. Either way, don't drop it. Last time someone dropped a bowl, the midwife didn't speak to her for 3 days. You edge closer to the woman lying on the straw mattress. She's pale, not in a delicate way, in a frightening, hollow way. Her lips are cracked, her hair plastered to her skull. Her eyes flutter open just long enough to find yours, and then close again. "Fetch the broth," the midwife says, and you move. You don't ask which broth. You just pick the one bubbling in the smaller pot. It smells of bone and onion, though the meat source is ambiguous. You hold it near her lips and tilt gently. A sip, then another, then a cough, then sleep. You think this is over? It's not. Birth isn't a single event. It's a siege. And the aftermath is just as dangerous. Fever can come later. Bleeding too. Not all mothers survive the week. Some don't survive the night. And when they don't, the birth room turns quiet in a way you can't clean with rags. A scholarly debate still lingers over whether medieval midwives were more or less effective than early modern doctors. Some argue their methods, based on observation, intuition, and community wisdom, saved more lives than male surgeons with forceps and leeches. Others insist their practices were too bound to superstition, too lacking in sterile precision. But no one debates this. Midwives knew their patients better. They knew their fears, their husbands, their secrets, and that counted for something. The midwife, your midwife now apparently, leans against the hearth. Her hands are stained, her eyes dry. "That went well," she says, as if you just planted turnips together. "Could have been worse." She gestures to the stool, and you sit. "You hear her?" she says, jerking her thumb toward the next room. And you strain your ears. Someone's arguing. A man's voice behind the door. He wanted a boy, she says flatly. Didn't get one. Now he's got complaints. You ask what she tells him. Nothing. It's not his blood on the floor. And just like that, you realize something sharp. Men are rarely in the room, but always in the equation. They fund the bread, question the outcome, and spread the gossip, but they're not the ones holding the child when it turns blue. There's a little cradle by the fire with the baby sleeping inside. Quiet for now. You tiptoe closer to the cradle. The baby's face is scrunched, and its tiny hands twitch in dreams. You wonder what babies dream about. Being born, being buried, or perhaps something simpler. The midwife sees you watching and mutters, "Don't get attached. Not until the second week. Not until the second week, when the odds start to tip in favor of survival. Before that, a cough, a cold wind, or a poorly cooked herb, all could unravel everything. And when they do, guess who gets blamed? You help her clean the soaked, dark linens stiffening at the corners, and learn how to fold them so the worst stains stay hidden. No one wants to be reminded," she says. "They want to believe it was all clean." That's the thing. The noise of the birth room isn't just physical, it's psychological, echoing what was said between contractions, who held her hand, and what jokes were made to distract or shame her. The midwife's tongue is almost as important as her hands. Light joke number 1. Some say midwives could tell if a baby would be stubborn by how loud the mother cursed during labor. One midwife claimed she could guess the child's zodiac sign by the way it kicked. She was wrong a lot, but very entertaining. You find yourself thinking back to your own birth. Of course, you weren't conscious, but you wonder now. Was there a woman like this, bent over a pot, wiping her hands, not getting thanked? There's no way to know. Most birth records weren't kept until much later. And even when they were, they didn't name the midwife, only the father, sometimes the priest, rarely the woman who made sure the baby breathed. Back in the cottage, the fire's gone down. You stoke it. The midwife nods in approval. That's her version of praise. She pours something into a cup, likely not broth this time, and sits. She's humming. A song with no real melody, just rhythm. You ask her name. She gives you one. You're not sure if it's real. Fringe tidbit. In some regions, midwives were believed to have the second sight, a gift for sensing when death hovered. Some believed it was a curse. Others called it a blessing. Most midwives never commented either way. They just did the work. You yawn. The air is thick, not just with smoke, but with centuries. You're beginning to feel it. That this job wasn't just about catching babies. It was about holding together something bigger. A village, a lineage, a reputation. She looks at you, amused. First time's always hardest, she says. Next one'll be worse. You almost laugh, but then you hear it. Another knock. Different rhythm. Faster. Urgent. She's already moving. You grab your cloth, because ready or not, the next war has begun. You step into the cold again. The knock was from a boy, no older than 10, panting, eyes wide, pointing frantically back toward the edge of the village. No words, just desperation. The midwife doesn't waste a second. She grabs her pouch, motions for you to bring the bundle of cloths, and you both rush after him. Your feet slap against the dirt path, dodging puddles, chickens, and a pile of something that might have been stew, or might have been something much worse. The sun hasn't yet risen, but the sky is lightening, just enough to see breath in the air and fear in the boy's face. The house is smaller, poorer than the last. The roof sags. There's no firewood stacked outside. When you enter, the first thing you notice is the silence. No moaning, no crying, just heavy breathing. And then you hear it. Shallow, fast, panicked. The mother is already deep into labor, curled sideways on a straw mat with no sheets, her teeth clenched, her face the color of cold wax. There's no one else here, no husband, no grandmother, just her and now, us. This time, the midwife doesn't speak. She moves with quiet efficiency, checking the woman's pulse, glancing at the water bowl, which is cold, untouched. She gives you a look. You start boiling water like your hands already know how. There's a story to this woman's isolation, but no one is telling it. That's another part of the midwife's world. Reading the silences, the absences. Sometimes the missing husband is dead. Sometimes he's working in a far-off town. Sometimes he left and didn't say why. And sometimes he was never supposed to be known in the first place. Historians still argue whether unmarried women in labor were common or rare in the medieval period. Some say it was scandalous and unusual. Others say it happened more often than the records suggest, just not where the priest could see. Either way, when the door was locked and the midwife was summoned, no one else needed to know. You kneel beside the woman. She grips your wrist suddenly, hard. Her eyes flutter open. She's young. Too young, maybe. Her lips move. You lean close. "Don't let them take her," she whispers. Her? The midwife is already at her side, slipping a hand beneath the blanket, pressing gently. "Almost there," she mutters. "But too fast. Too fast. That's never good. It means the baby's coming before the body is ready. It means things might tear, rupture, break. It means more blood than usual. And more blood means more risk." The contractions hit like waves, one after another, with barely time to breathe between. You press a cloth to her forehead. She turns her face away. Not from you. From something internal. You wonder if she'll survive. Midwives learn to read labor like a weather map. This is a storm with no eye. It's all wind and rain. No calm center. The baby comes suddenly, too suddenly. One push, and then a slip, and then nothing. No cry. The midwife clears the nose and mouth quickly, rubs the chest. The baby is limp, not blue, but not moving. Then a cough, a shudder, a cry, weak but real. The air itself exhales. The baby is a girl. You wrap her in a worn cloth and tuck her close to the mother's chest, though the mother doesn't respond at first. She's too far under. Her breath is shallow. Her skin is pale. The blood beneath her is still growing. The midwife packs herbs, murmurs something under her breath, maybe a chant, maybe a list of instructions, and then she turns to you. "We'll need help." You rush to the door, find the boy still outside. He's been crying. You tell him to run. Get his aunt, his neighbor, anyone. He takes off without question. You return to find the midwife feeding the mother something dark and bitter from a spoon. She's half conscious now. That's better than before. This birth room, like the last, isn't quiet. But the noise is different. It's not chaos, it's tension. Low level, humming, sharp as a blade under cloth. Light joke number 2. Some midwives believe that if a woman swore at her husband during birth, she'd bear a daughter. If she swore at the midwife, it'd be a boy. This woman swore at no one. Maybe that's why she had a girl. Or maybe the superstition doesn't hold up. You start cleaning again. The routine is familiar now. Fold the cloths. Wipe the blood. Check the fire. You glance at the baby, still breathing. You glance at the mother, still bleeding, but slower now, still here. You don't speak, you just work. The midwife finally sits, her body sagging like it's no longer being held up by anything but bone. She takes out a small pouch and begins grinding something with a tiny stone mortar. It smells sharp, minty maybe. You watch her hands. They don't shake. Not yet. She hands you a bundle. "Hang this over the doorway," she says. "Keep the spirits from circling back." You don't ask which spirits. You just do it. Not because you believe, but because she does. Or at least, she believes it enough to pretend. That's most of midwifery, really. Pretending something will work long enough for it to do so. Fringe tidbit. In some places, it was common to smear butter on the baby's forehead or feet immediately after birth. Not for nourishment, but to confuse evil spirits looking to steal the soul. Butter, it turns out, makes bad camouflage, but it gave comfort, and sometimes that's enough. The woman stirs again. Her eyes open, a little more focused now. She sees the baby and lets out a tiny sound, not quite a word. You press the infant closer to her chest. She closes her arms around it. "She'll make it," the midwife says. You almost believe her. Outside, footsteps approach. A woman enters. Older, worried. The boy's aunt, maybe. She gasps at the sight of blood, then rushes to the mother's side. The midwife stands, bones cracking. "She'll need soup," she says. And quiet. You leave quietly with her, back out into the dawn. The path is still wet. Your clothes are stained. Your hands ache. "You did better this time," she says. You don't smile. You just nod. You wake the next morning with the scent of boiled linen and burned thyme still clinging to your sleeves. Your muscles ache in places you didn't know had names. The midwife, of course, is already up, tending the small garden behind her cottage, muttering at a particularly stubborn rosemary bush. You want to ask her how she sleeps. The answer, you suspect, is not well. She hands you a bowl of something that tastes like regret and turnips. Then she tells you where you're going today. Not to another birth. Not yet. Today is for errands. You're carrying herbs, letters, and one sealed pouch to a neighboring village. Nothing suspicious, she says. But don't open the pouch. Of course you want to, but you don't. Instead, you notice something peculiar as you walk, the way people glance at you. Not full stares, but enough to let you know you've been noticed. Being around a midwife is like wearing a scent others can't place but don't trust. You're not one of them anymore. You're something adjacent, close to blood, to secrets, to power, and people fear that. You stop by a small farm where the woman of the house trades you 3 duck eggs for a handful of dried nettle. She doesn't meet your eyes. She just nods. Tell her thank you, she says quietly. Then, lower still, I'm late again. Tell her that too. You nod, say nothing, and move on. Historians still argue whether medieval midwives doubled as informal contraceptive advisors. It's hard to say. Official records are sparse, and when they do exist, they were often written by male clergy with a particular interest in purity, not practicality. But oral histories passed in kitchens and fields suggest that midwives knew far more than they let on, and said far less than they knew. Back at the cottage, the midwife is grinding something in her mortar with a rhythm that suggests she's done it 1,000 times before. Did she say she was late? She asks without looking up. You nod. She'll need tansy tea. Not too strong this time. You don't ask what happens if it's too strong. You just prepare the bundle. That's part of the strange duality you're starting to understand. Midwives were both revered and feared. Needed, yet never fully trusted. They walked a line so thin, it might as well have been drawn in dust. Fringe tidbit? In some regions, it was customary to gift the midwife with bread, salt, and wine after a successful birth. But if the baby died, or the mother, sometimes those gifts turned to stones thrown at her door. Praise and blame came from the same hands. Later that afternoon, a woman visits. Not for childbirth, but for advice. She's older. Widow, perhaps. She sits with perfect posture, hands clasped. She wants to know if her daughter, newly married, often sick, has been cursed. She doesn't say curse, of course. She says things like strange stomach, and fainting at night, and bad air in the room. The midwife listens, nods, and prepares a poultice. Mugwort, clove, crushed apple skin. She wraps it in cloth, hands it over. Put this under the pillow, she says. If it smells sweeter in the morning, she's fine. It's not medicine. It's permission to worry less. You walk the woman to the door. She thanks you, presses something into your palm. A button, worn smooth. A token of appreciation? A silent bribe? No idea. You pocket it anyway. Once she's gone, you ask the midwife, what if it doesn't smell sweet? Then we try something else. There's always something else. Another herb, another chant, another lie that keeps the fear at bay long enough for the body to heal on its own. You've noticed by now, every remedy seems to carry 2 purposes. One for the body, one for the soul. Healing here is never just physical. It's social, emotional, even spiritual. If you don't treat the whole, the wound returns. If not in the body, then in the whispers. Light joke number 3. A young midwife once told a crying new father that cabbage leaves would help his wife's breasts stop hurting. She didn't mention that they also made the entire room smell like soup. He refused to touch her for a week. Best rest she ever got, the midwife said. You sit outside that evening, sorting dried sage. The air is soft. The smoke from the fire mingles with the smell of marjoram. You hear children laughing somewhere across the fields. A rare sound. Most children here are quiet, taught to be. So when they laugh, you treasure it. The midwife joins you, settling down with a tired sigh. She doesn't talk much unless it's necessary. But tonight she's softer. She tells you about the first birth she attended, how she fainted, how she was slapped awake, how she cried for an hour after it was over, And then again, when no one thanked her. That's how you know it's real, she says. When no one thanks you. You ask why she kept doing it. She shrugs. Someone had to. Another debate still circulates among scholars, whether midwives were organized or solitary. Were they part of guilds, bound by codes and knowledge sharing? Or were they lone wolves, guarding their secrets like treasure? The answer likely is both. Some towns had formal midwifery systems, others relied on a single woman with a steady hand and a sharp tongue. Here, your midwife seems both ancient and feral. She belongs to no one, but everyone needs her. That night, you dream of cloth soaked in red, of babies born with open eyes, of women whispering to each other in languages you've never heard, but somehow understand. You wake before dawn, and there's already someone knocking, this time a man. You answer. He's sheepish, eyes darting, says his wife isn't due for weeks, but something feels wrong. She's not speaking, just staring. You call the midwife. She listens, nods, and follows him without a word. You trail behind, bundle in hand, cloths ready. When you arrive, the house is fine. Too fine. Clean floors, quiet halls, the smell of wax and lavender. The woman lies in a grand bed, motionless, eyes open, not in pain, just not present. The midwife checks her pulse, her temperature, lifts her eyelids. Then she leans in, whispers something you can't hear. The woman blinks, once, then again, and starts to weep. You don't ask what she said. You never will. That's between midwife and mother, but the silence has broken, and that sometimes is enough. You walk home in silence. The midwife says nothing. Neither do you, because now you know something few people ever do. Not every delivery involves a child. Sometimes it's a woman. Sometimes it's you. You don't remember falling asleep, only waking again to the smell of the boiled barley and thyme. Your hands are blistered from yesterday's work, but there's no time to feel sorry for yourself. The midwife's already outside with a bundle of dried tansies slung under one arm, and a look on her face that tells you today won't be about healing. Today is about hiding. She beckons you with 2 fingers. You follow her down the slope behind the cottage, through nettles and low-hanging branches, until you reach a shallow stream. There, tucked into a crevice behind some stones, is a hollowed-out box. She opens it quickly, revealing vials, cloths, a small knife wrapped in leather, and something that looks suspiciously like a page torn from a Bible. Only the words are scratched out and rewritten in something much older. You stare. She sees your reaction. Tools, she says. Only dangerous if someone else finds them. This isn't the first time she's hidden things. Won't be the last. Being a midwife doesn't just mean catching babies. It means navigating a landscape of suspicion. The same skills that make you valuable also make you vulnerable. And the line between healer and heretic is drawn with vanishing ink. In town, a woman was recently accused of sorcery for owning too many herbs. Not unusual herbs, just too many. Dried mint, feverfew, a bundle of valerian root she kept under her bed. When asked why she had so much, she said it helped her sleep. That was apparently the wrong answer. The church confiscated it all. Historians still argue whether these witch trials were truly about belief or simply fear of women who knew too much. Some scholars claim it was about control, regulating who could legally heal. Others suggest deeper resentment toward women who functioned outside male institutions, who held power quietly. Midwives were always walking that edge. They knew when to stay silent, when to whisper, and, when necessary, when to bury the evidence. You help reseal the box. The midwife takes a long look around before covering it again with leaves. No one must find it. Not because it's evil, but because no one wants to understand what they fear. Back at the cottage, a girl is waiting. Thin, pale, barely 16, if that. She looks at you, then the midwife, then back at the floor. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. The midwife asks her no questions, just gives her a warm cloth and tells her to sit. You bring broth. She doesn't touch it. The midwife takes you aside. She's missed 2 months. Says it's from stress. You understand. It's not stress. And she's not here for comfort. She's here for something she can't ask for out loud. The midwife won't call it an abortion. That word is too dangerous. She'll call it restoration. She'll say the girl's body needs balancing. And in truth, that's not a lie. Her body is already trying to do what it must. The midwife's job is just to help it safely along, or at least less dangerously. You prepare tea, pennyroyal, parsley, a whisper of savin, not enough to be certain, just enough to nudge, just enough to call it medicine. She drinks it slowly, hands shaking. The midwife stays with her through the night. You sit by the fire, listening for signs, pain, bleeding, silence. They all come, just not in the order you expect. Fringe tidbit. In some medieval texts, it's suggested that midwives carried moon charms, small stones said to induce menstruation if held under the tongue during the full moon. No one knows if they worked, but the belief was strong enough to get some women burned for owning one. The girl leaves at dawn, walking slowly, shoulders tight. The midwife doesn't ask if she's all right. She just hands her a cloth and says, "If you start to feel cold inside, come back." That's how these things are done. Without signatures, without witnesses, without certainty. You ask later if it's dangerous, what they did. The midwife nods. Everything we do is. She doesn't mean the herbs. She means the choice to help. That evening, the church bell rings. Not for mass, for death. You hear whispers before you see the body. A woman, middle-aged, no husband, found near the woods, face turned to the sky. No signs of trauma, no signs of peace. You follow the midwife through the crowd. No one stops her, but many step back. They know her touch is familiar with the dead as much as the living. She kneels, examines the eyes, the tongue, the fingers, says nothing, then softly, cold blood. Not quick. You watch. The villagers wait. One of them asks, "Was it a curse?" The midwife looks up. "If it was, we're all cursed." She says it without irony. And still, people believe her. Because even as they fear her, they trust her more than they trust each other. Scholars still debate whether midwives were part of village justice systems. Officially, no. But in practice, they were often called to assess injuries, pronounce death, even advise on guilt. Not because they were legal authorities, but because they were there when it mattered. And they remembered everything. Later, the midwife tells you a secret. That woman, she wasn't cursed, she was hungry. Too proud to beg, she says. Too alone to be noticed. You don't say anything, because in a village this small, everyone thinks someone else is paying attention. You return home and light a candle, not for prayer, but to chase the chill. You think about the girl who left, the woman who didn't return, the herbs in the box by the stream, all of it connected, all of it quiet, all of it almost invisible. Light joke number 4. A midwife once told a new mother that naming her baby after a saint would ensure good luck, just not the one who'd already failed to protect her in labor. The woman named her son Sign Option. He became a baker, not a saint, but very lucky with bread. You're starting to see it now. The midwife's work isn't just physical, it's political, not in the grand royal sense, but in the way of power passed hand to hand, in private corners, over cups of tea and silent bargains. There's a kind of authority in being the only one people go to when things go wrong. A quiet dominance, not given, but taken, earned in blood and patience. That night, as you help grind dried fennel and wrap clean linens, the midwife finally looks at you and says, "You're starting to see, aren't you?" You nod. Good. Then listen close. Everything we do leaves a trace, not just in the body, in the memory, in the way people look at you after. You ask, "Does that ever go away?" She smiles. "Would you want it to?" You don't answer, because you're not sure yet. And as the moon rises, pale and round and indifferent, you realize the only true protection in this world is knowing what no one else dares admit out loud, that sometimes the most dangerous people in a village are the ones who know how to stop the bleeding. It starts raining before dawn, not the soft drizzle of sleeping skies, but a steady, spiteful kind of rain that turns roads into rivers and thatch roofs into sieves. You wake to the sound of dripping and the feeling that everything, including your bones, is damp. The midwife is already up, of course, sipping something hot from a wooden cup, her feet bare on the stone floor. "We're not going anywhere today," she mutters, "but that doesn't mean we rest." And so begins the day of brewing. You didn't realize how many herbs she kept until now. Bundles hang from the rafters, tucked in corners, stuffed into clay jars labeled in faded ink or not at all. Some smell sweet, like chamomile or crushed apple peel. Others reek of bitter root and something that reminds you of sweat and iron. Each one has a story, and each one carries risk. The fire crackles under a blackened pot. She adds crushed juniper, elderflower, a twist of garlic, and something green and stringy that might once have been nettle. The steam curls up into your eyes, and you cough. "Don't breathe so deep," she says, amused. "This one's not for you." She hands you another task, sorting the dried leaves into safe, strong, and deadly. You try to protest. She raises an eyebrow. "You've watched long enough. Time to guess." You get 2 wrong. She doesn't tell you which. Light joke number 5. One midwife once labeled her jars with symbols only she understood. A new apprentice mistook a pain reliever for a purgative and gave it to a constipated priest. He praised her for delivering him both spiritually and physically. The midwife never corrected him. You ask about poisons. She doesn't flinch. Every cure is a poison at the wrong dose. Then she says something else, quieter. And sometimes, poison is the only mercy a woman's got. You stop sorting after that. It's not that she wants to be cryptic. It's that she doesn't want to name everything. Naming makes things solid, real, traceable, and midwives don't always have the luxury of being understood. Fringe tidbit. There are recorded cases in medieval Europe of midwives carrying amulets made of animal teeth, worn not for style but protection, against spirits, against disease, against men. Some even buried them in the walls of their homes. You check the cracks in the cottage. You're not sure, but there's definitely something tucked above the doorframe. By midday, the rain shows no sign of stopping. That's when the visitors come. First, a hunched old man with a limp, asking for something to ease his joints. The midwife gives him a jar of what smells like spoiled honey and tells him to rub it on his knees, with an apology for every time he ignored his wife. Then, a boy with a cut so deep across his hand, it makes your stomach turn. He says he was climbing a fence. You suspect it was a fight. The midwife washes the wound, stitches it closed with something coarse, then blows on it as if her breath alone could seal pain. The boy cries, but not loudly. She pats his head. Good. That means it'll heal. Historians still argue whether midwives routinely treated men and children or strictly focused on women. The records lean toward specialization, but in practice, when the barber was drunk or the priest was away, the midwife was often the only person who knew how to stop the bleeding and boil the water. The door swings open again, this time with force. A woman rushes in, drenched and frantic. Her child, no older than 4, burning with fever, eyes fluttering, cheeks flushed, sweat beading at his temples. The midwife takes him without a word. You help strip off the soaked clothes, wrap him in dry cloth, and hold him while she prepares something that bubbles like a curse and smells like cloves, vinegar, and tears. She pours it into a wooden spoon, waits for the child to swallow. He doesn't. She coaxes. He gags. She tries again. He takes it on the 3rd try. Then she wraps him in another cloth and cradles him like a bundle of hot stones. "Now we wait," she says. You wait. The mother paces. The boy twitches. The rain doesn't stop. After an hour, the child stirs, opens his eyes, then vomits on the floor. The midwife smiles. "Good," she says. "He's fighting again." The mother starts to cry. The boy falls asleep. Later, as she scrubs the floor, the midwife tells you this: "It's not about healing. It's about buying time." That's what we do. We buy another day, maybe 2. Sometimes that's all people need. You think about that. About how many people come to her not for miracles, but margins. A small push back from the edge. Enough to catch their breath. Enough to hold on. She shows you her ledger, if you can call it that. A piece of old cloth with names and dates scratched in with ash. No diagnoses. Just symbols, circles, X's, lines through some names, dots next to others. What do the dots mean? You ask. She doesn't answer. That night, the fire burns low. The boy sleeps beside the hearth. The woman lies curled beside him, finally still. You ask the midwife how she learned all this. My grandmother, she says. She was quieter than me, but smarter. You ask what happened to her. They hanged her. The words fall into the fire like wet logs. Why? You ask, barely able to get the word out. They said she touched a baby that died a week later. Said she put something in the bath water. You don't speak. She didn't. But she wasn't liked, and that was enough. Scholars still debate the extent to which superstition influenced the persecution of midwives. Some say it was rare. Others argue it was far more common than records show. Just less formal. Not always with trials. Sometimes with a whisper, a stone, a disappearance. The midwife leans back, stares at the ceiling. I learned not to make enemies, just memories. People don't accuse what they remember fondly. You write that down in your head. You think you'll need it. The rain lets up around midnight. The boy is still breathing. The mother mouths a thank you, then curls into sleep. You and the midwife sit in silence. You feel your own eyelids drooping, but then she says something that jolts you back. We're lucky this time. You look at her. She's not smiling. Luck, she says, is just what people call it when they don't want to admit who saved them. You lie down near the fire, wrapped it in an old wool cloak that smells like herbs and ash. The floor's hard, the air's damp, but you're warm. And for now, that's enough. Because tonight, you didn't just learn about herbs. You learned about mercy, the quiet kind, the kind with hands that never shake, the kind that doesn't need to explain itself, the kind that disappears before anyone can say thank you. Morning brings a kind of stillness that feels unnatural. No coughing child, no hurried knock, no whispers creeping through the window slats. Just birdsong and the soft creak of old wood as the house stretches into the day. You sit up slowly, half expecting something to go wrong the moment your feet touch the floor. But for once, nothing does. The midwife is at the table, grinding bark into powder with the focus of someone trying not to think. You sit across from her and begin folding fresh linens. It's the closest thing to peace you've had since this strange apprenticeship began. But peace, you've learned, is a temporary guest. She breaks the silence without looking up. You ever wonder why they let us do this? You blink. The question comes from nowhere. They don't trust us. They barely tolerate us. But when their wives scream, their daughters bleed, or their secrets grow bellies, they come running. You think for a moment, then answer, because they're afraid of the alternative. She smiles, but not kindly. No, because they're afraid of the being seen, and we already see too much. She pours the powder into a pouch, ties it with thread, and sets it aside. Then she tells you to get ready. We're visiting the manor today. You stop breathing for a second. The manor. You've heard of it in passing. Stone walls, large halls, long shadows. A place where people don't knock when they enter, because the doors never close. The midwife changes her apron, braids her hair tightly, and grabs a jar of thick salve. You follow, palms sweating. The path to the manor is long and lined with hedges that have no business being that neatly trimmed. Everything smells faintly of rosewater and cooked meat. The place is too clean, too quiet. You already miss the dirt. You're led inside by a man with a voice so smooth it makes your teeth itch. He doesn't meet the midwife's eyes. He nods, bows slightly, then disappears through a side door. Power here moves with silk, not noise. You're shown into a room with high ceilings and embroidered cushions. The lady is reclining on a daybed, one hand resting on her belly, which is full and taut. Not quite dew, but close. Her skin is porcelain, her eyes sharp. Midwife, she says. Not a greeting, an evaluation. The midwife bows slightly. My lady, you stand frozen. The lady glances at you, expression unreadable. I requested no men, she says. She's not a man, the midwife replies. Just new. A pause, then a nod. You stay silent. The lady speaks again. I've had dreams. Bad ones. The baby doesn't cry in them. The midwife nods. First-time mothers often dream silence. It's not a prophecy. Still, the lady says, stroking her stomach, I'd like you nearby. There's something in her tone you don't like. Not fear, not pride. Something sharper, like she knows exactly how much her life costs and how many people will pay it. The midwife checks her pulse, her belly, her breath. Nothing unusual, but she leaves behind a small vial on the bedside table anyway. For cramping, she says. The lady doesn't thank her. Back outside, you exhale for the first time in an hour. She's clever, the midwife says, walking fast. That's dangerous. You ask why. Because clever women make enemies twice as fast, especially when they bleed. Historians still argue whether noble women had better outcomes in childbirth than peasant women. On paper, yes. They had more food, more privacy, more midwives. But they also had more interference. Doctors who didn't understand childbirth, expectations that didn't permit failure, and husbands who saw sons as legacy, not life. Sometimes you're better off giving birth on dirt. On the way home, the midwife stops at a small cottage near the edge of the forest. She knocks 3 times in a rhythm you now recognize as deliberate. A woman opens the door, eyes wide with worry. Her child has a cough, wet and low, worse at night. Inside, you sit with the boy while the midwife listens to his lungs. She prepares a paste of honey, mustard seed, and ground pine resin, rubs it on his chest, wraps him tight, then whispers something into his ear that makes him giggle. The mother watches with hollow eyes. Will it work? Maybe, the midwife says. Maybe not, but he'll feel held. That helps. You glance at the fire. It's low. The room is cold. She leaves behind more than herbs. She leaves a story. When my daughter coughed like that, she says, I sang to her every night until it passed. The woman's eyes widen. You have a daughter? No, she says. Not anymore. The silence after that is long. Fringe tidbit. In some folk traditions, midwives were expected to name the babies they delivered if the mother died during childbirth. It was believed that the soul wouldn't settle without a name whispered into the world by someone who cared. You ask about the midwife's daughter on the way back. She lived 3 days, she says. Born too early, nothing to be done. You want to offer comfort, but you know better by now. She doesn't need comfort. She needs space to keep walking. That evening, the rain returns in sheets. Thunder shakes the rafters. The fire roars just to compete. You and the midwife sort dried marigold and whisper your thoughts into the flickering silence. She tells you about the time she helped a woman birth twins, one alive, one not. How she had to pretend they were both fine until the grandmother left the room. How she buried the stillborn under the woman's bed so the spirit wouldn't wander. Did it work? You ask. She never saw it, the midwife says. Sometimes that's enough. You sip something bitter and hot. It burns in a way that feels necessary. Light joke number 6. One village believed that if you sneezed 3 times during labor, the baby would be born with freckles shaped like clover leaves. A midwife once faked sneezes to distract a panicking mother. The baby came out spotless. She claimed it meant he was a saint. The mother believed her. You ask if all her stories are true. She shrugs. Truth's what you remember when it matters. Later that night, a knock. This time, a man again. Pale, quiet, hand shaking. My wife, he says. It started. The midwife gathers her things. You don't need to be told. You're already dressed. On the way out, she glances at you. You're not watching anymore, she says. You're learning. And for the first time, you feel it. Something tightening inside you. Not fear, not even readiness. Responsibility. The kind that doesn't wait to be asked. The kind that arrives the moment someone says your name in a voice too small to carry on its own. And you follow. Because this is what you do now. The labor has already begun by the time you reach the house. You can hear it from the road. A sharp, wet gasp, followed by a low, rhythmic moan. The kind of sound that tells you things are moving fast. Too fast for comfort. The father steps aside as you pass him, his face pale and utterly useless. The room is warm, but not from firelight. It's from body heat, from panic, from too many people pressed in too close. There's a grandmother muttering prayers in one corner, an aunt pacing with a wet rag, and the mother, centered on a pile of blankets, legs trembling, eyes wild. The midwife doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She moves into the room with a stillness that silences it, not with command, with inevitability. You follow, setting the cloths where she gestures, boiling water without needing to ask why. You know the dance now, but this time is different. The baby is coming in breech. You see it immediately. Feet, not a crown. The worst position, the most dangerous. The midwife doesn't panic. She rolls up her sleeves and slides closer. Her hands move with a surgeon's grace. No wasted effort, no dramatic flourishes, just quiet precision. She asks the mother to breathe slower. She doesn't. She can't. The moans are sharper now, edged with a rising scream. You hold the mother's hand. She squeezes it like she's trying to break something loose from this world. Turn, the midwife whispers, not to the mother, but to the child. She reaches in, slowly, impossibly calm. You want to look away, but you force yourself not to. This is what it means to witness, to stay even when it gets unbearable. She coaxes, waits, coaxes again. The feet slip back in. The cord follows. Then suddenly, a shoulder, a hip, a scream that sounds final. And then, there he is, alive, slick, red, screaming. The room breathes again. The grandmother falls to her knees. The aunt cries. The father still hasn't moved. You sit back, dizzy. The midwife doesn't. She's already checking the mother. The bleeding is heavy, too heavy. She packs herbs, whispers instructions, pinches pressure points, and pours something between the woman's lips. This isn't over. You see it on her face. But slowly, painfully slowly, the bleeding stops. Stubborn girl, the midwife murmurs, stroking the mother's hair. Always the ones who swear the most who survive. The baby sleeps now, wrapped tightly, placed near the mother's side. The family hovers, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. You've learned that both emotions often come together in this work. Light joke number 7. One village believed that if the first word spoken after a baby's birth was rabbit, the child would be fast and clever. The midwife once whispered rabbit after a particularly difficult birth. The boy grew up to steal chickens from 3 villages. Fast, yes. Clever, debatable. Outside, the sun is rising. You didn't realize it had been night. You and the midwife walk home in silence, feet dragging through mud, hands sore and eyes unfocused. When you reach the cottage, she sits by the fire and takes off her shoes. You do the same. Then, without preamble, she pulls a small cloth pouch from the inside of her robe and hands it to you. Inside, 3 things: a folded ribbon, a sliver of soapstone, and a dried sprig of yarrow. You look up. She says, "You're ready." You try to protest, to say no, not yet, that you don't know enough, but she cuts you off. None of us do. She turns away and begins to stir the pot over the fire. You sit, the pouch in your hand, feeling something shift inside you. You've crossed a line you didn't even see, and now there's no going back. You spend the day in a haze, not tired, emptied, like something was pulled out of you, and nothing's grown back yet. By late afternoon, there's another knock. This one soft, hesitant. A girl stands at the door, thin, hair neatly braided, clothes far too clean. She clutches a bundle in her arms, wrapped in a fine shawl. Inside the bundle, a baby. Too quiet, too still. The girl says nothing, just stares. You gesture for her to sit, take the bundle, unwrap it slowly. The baby is dead. Has been for hours, maybe more. No bruises, no marks, just silence. The midwife doesn't ask questions. She takes the child gently and places it in a shallow bowl lined with cloth. She lights a candle, not for ceremony, but for light. The girl still hasn't spoken. Finally, she says, "He wasn't supposed to happen." The midwife nods. Then, without drama or ritual, she wraps the child again and prepares the herbs for burial. You ask softly, "Should we get the priest?" The midwife doesn't answer. Later, when the girl is gone, she says, "The priest won't say anything we haven't already said." You press your hands together and look at the floor. Fringe tidbit. In some parts of Europe, midwives performed baptisms of necessity when babies were stillborn or dying during the labor. A few drops of water, a whispered name, a line of Latin half remembered. It was enough to calm grieving mothers and avoid church punishment. You wonder if today's child got a name. You wonder how many don't. The midwife tells you, "We name them anyway, even if we don't say it aloud." You nod. You feel it. Later, as the sky darkens again, she hands you the bowl of dried yarrow and tells you to speak to it. What do I say? She shrugs. Whatever you would if it could answer. So you do. You whisper a thank you, and a sorry, and a hope that someone, somewhere, will remember that little silent breath that never made it into the world. She nods, and says nothing more. Light joke number 8. A midwife once claimed that a baby born on a Tuesday would grow up to tell the truth too often, and lose friends because of it. When asked what happened to that baby, she said, "He became a tax collector." You smile at that one. But it doesn't erase the weight. You sleep early that night. Not out of comfort, but out of resignation. Your dreams are full of footsteps, doors, crying, silence. The kind of dreams that don't fade with morning light. The kind you carry in your hands the next day, even when they're busy grinding herbs or folding cloths. This is midwifery. Not just birth, but death. Not just life, but the space between. And you begin to understand why the midwife never needs to raise her voice. Because once you've held enough silence, it speaks for you. There's a rhythm to village life you hadn't noticed before. At first it seemed like chaos. People coming and going, illness rising and falling like the tides, births breaking through the stillness like storms. But now you see the pattern beneath it all. There's a choreography here, a quiet, stubborn pulse, and the midwife moves in time with it. Today is market day, and though her role is not officially part of the stalls or trades, she is there, as always. You carry the basket. She carries everything else, the glances, the whispers, the requests murmured between sacks of barley and handfuls of leeks. A woman tugs her sleeve near the soapmaker's stall. "My sister's belly grows too fast," she whispers. "Too round." The midwife nods. "Could be twins." The woman frowns. "Could be something else." Nothing more is said. You make your way through the crowd, past tradesmen and fruit carts, through the steam of roasting onions and the smell of livestock. You've never been more aware of eyes on your back. People pretend not to notice the midwife, but when they pass, they look, and when they look, they wonder what she knows. You stop at a stall for dried rosemary. The seller, a man with cracked knuckles and a wandering eye, gives the midwife a heavy discount. "For your good work," he says. His smile fades when she doesn't smile back. You move on. Midway through the square, you notice a young couple standing awkwardly by the fountain. The woman's hand rests protectively over her stomach. The man avoids your gaze. The midwife nods toward them. "Matchmaking season," she murmurs. You ask what she means. "They'll marry before the month is out. Probably after I help them pretend the baby came early." And just like that, you understand. Historians still argue whether midwives acted as social gatekeepers, custodians of family legitimacy, and quiet conspirators in scandal. The evidence is circumstantial. Letters, gossip, birth records that didn't quite line up. But if you've ever stood in a marketplace with one, you stop wondering. The midwife doesn't just deliver babies. She delivers futures, quietly, off the books, with a nod and a recipe that includes just enough plausibility to avoid suspicion. Fringe tidbit. In some towns, midwives were paid extra, not for what they did, but for what they didn't say. A kept silence had a price, and the wisest midwives kept 2 ledgers, one for herbs and one for secrets. As the afternoon wears on, you stop by a baker's stall. The midwife eyes a small round loaf, crusted with caraway. She gestures to you. "Give the seller this," she says, handing you a small vial of crushed thyme and bark. The baker takes it, sniffs, then nods. "For the colic," he says. "Thank you." He hands you 2 loaves. You blink. "You overpaid," you whisper. "No," she replies. "He undercharged. He's desperate." You eat one of the loaves as you walk home. Still warm, still soft. But there's a heaviness to the day now, like the silence behind every transaction is starting to hum. Back at the cottage, you unpack the goods. The midwife begins to crush seeds with the side of a spoon, muttering proportions under her breath. You write them down as fast as you can. Then there's a knock. Again. This time, it's the widow from the southern field. Her eyes are red. Her fingers shake. "It's my daughter," she says. She won't stop crying, and she won't say why. You glance at the midwife. She's already moving. At the house, the daughter is sitting in the corner of a tiny room, knees pulled to her chest. No bruises, no blood. Just silence and terror. The midwife kneels beside her, doesn't speak, just sits. Eventually, the girl looks up. "Mama says I'm cursed." The midwife shakes her head. "No," she says. "You're just hurting. There are no herbs for this. No chant, no salve." So the midwife does the only thing she can. She listens. For a full hour, the girl speaks in pieces. Fragments. Names half whispered. Things that shouldn't have happened. Things that did. When it's done, the midwife wraps her arms around her like she's made of smoke. Later, when the girl's asleep and the mother is wringing her hands in the next room, the midwife says, "She'll need watching." Not questions. The mother nods, ashamed. You ask quietly, "What will happen now?" "Nothing," the midwife says, and that's the problem. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't have to. Light joke number 9. One midwife claimed she could predict whether a girl would become a nun or a troublemaker based on how long she stared into the fire. Turns out they were often the same person. That night, you sit by the fire and feel the weight of 100 untold stories pressing against the walls. Birth is the beginning, yes, but so much comes before and after. Guilt, fear, hope, regret. The midwife begins to sew something into the hem of her cloak. You watch in silence. "What is it?" you finally ask. "Dried mint. For protection." "From what?" "People who don't want to remember what they asked you to forget." You write that down too. Later, you ask her if she's ever been in love. She doesn't laugh. She doesn't smile. "Once," she says. "He was a priest. I was 16. You raise your eyebrows. "He said I reminded him of the Virgin Mary." She says. "I took it as a compliment." "What happened?" "He got promoted." You both chuckle softly, but her eyes say she's somewhere else. You think about how many lives she's shaped, how many marriages she's repaired, how many she's prevented, and all the while, her own story is kept folded inside a hem, stitched beneath her collar, ground into a vial of time. This is power, not loud, not written, not praised, but constant, fringe tidbit. Some believe midwives could see through lies, literally. If a woman lied in their presence, milk would sour or herbs would wilt. A silly myth, perhaps, but one that gave midwives an edge in truth-telling few dared test. Before bed, she hands you a new pouch. Inside, dried clover, a carved bone bead, and a thin ribbon stained with wine. "For what?" you ask. She shrugs. "In case you're ever asked to lie well." You sleep that night knowing you've crossed another invisible line. You're no longer just learning how to birth bodies. You're learning how to midwife stories, and how to carry the ones that never get told. You wake to the scent of burning wood and something metallic in the air. The midwife is already gone. Not unusual. She disappears at odd hours sometimes. You used to find it unsettling. Now it feels normal, like the wind shifting or the rooster forgetting to crow. You clean the hearth, sort herbs, fold cloths, all the usual. Then a knock at the door. Not rushed, not frightened, but heavy. You answer it, and 2 men stand outside. One wears the apron of a blacksmith. The other, the red sash of a church attendant. They don't greet you. "Where is she?" the churchman asks. You hesitate. "She's not here." He nods like he expected the lie. "We'll wait." They step inside without invitation. You offer no tea. They don't sit. Instead, they glance around the cottage, at the bundles of herbs, the scorched wooden spoon, the basin still stained from last night's poultice. "She's been busy," the blacksmith says flatly. You don't answer. It's not until they start murmuring near the fireplace that it hits you. They're not here for healing. They're here for judgment. Historians still argue whether midwives were targeted more for their actions or their associations. The lines between healer and heretic were always blurry. A single whispered accusation could collapse a lifetime of work, especially when power, church or man-made, wanted order. When the midwife returns, she knows instantly. She doesn't ask why they're here. She just sets her basket down and removes her cloak. Her hands are stained with something that looks like walnut dye. But you know better. She was delivering again. Somewhere she didn't want you to follow. The churchman steps forward. There's been a death. The midwife nods. There's always been a death. He frowns. We heard you were seen entering the widow Morella's home. She asked me. She died. She was dying when I arrived. He glances at the blacksmith, who shifts his weight. They don't accuse her. Not directly. Not yet. She left no confession. No priest. He continues. She left a clean bed and a quiet breath. You admire her calm. The room feels 10 degrees colder, but she doesn't tremble. She bled from the mouth, the blacksmith says suddenly. The midwife nods. She drank boiled nettle. Her stomach was already gone. Some say you gave it to her. Some say the moon is jealous of fire. Doesn't make it true. The blacksmith mutters something under his breath. The churchman straightens. If you're withholding cause of death, that's enough for suspicion. Now she looks at him. Full. Direct. I'm withholding nothing. I gave her warmth. The rest was God's. You realize they want her to beg, to explain herself, to admit guilt. Not because it's real, but because it's more comfortable than truth. She doesn't. They eventually leave, unsatisfied, but not defeated. They'll return. She sits at the hearth, staring into the fire. Did she ask you to come? You whisper. No. But she left her window open. That was enough. You don't understand at first. Then you remember. An old gesture among some women in the village. Leaving a window cracked meant, I don't want to die alone. No one teaches it, but every midwife knows it. Fringe tidbit. In some rural regions, a dying woman would lay out her oldest apron on the threshold as a silent summons. Not for family, for the midwife. So someone who understood could sit with her. Not to save her, just to see her. You think of Morella, alone in that bed. Her final hours held not by God, but by a woman with cracked hands and a quiet presence. You ask the midwife if she's afraid. No, she says, then softer. But I'm getting tired of remembering everyone else's pain. That night, no one knocks. No one cries out. But the silence is heavy. You sit by the fire and think about the weight of accusation. How quickly a healer becomes a threat. How care becomes suspicion. How mercy becomes sin, if it doesn't come with the right paperwork. Light joke number 10. A midwife once told a bishop she could remove curses with pickled garlic and old hymns. He reported her to the town council. They cleared her of wrongdoing, but fined her for making him vomit during the demonstration. You smile, then stop, because laughter doesn't hold tonight. The next morning, you walk to Morella's house. It's already empty, stripped, the hearth cold. Her neighbors avoid the windows as you pass. You leave a sprig of lavender on the doorstep and keep walking. Back at the cottage, the midwife is writing something on a scrap of cloth. Names, dates. Not for a record, for memory. You realize she's been doing it for years. She hands you a needle and thread. You'll need your own ledger soon. You don't argue. That afternoon, a child comes in with a fever. His mother carries him, whispering apologies for interrupting. She's heard the rumors, but she came anyway, because the midwife is still the only one who knows how to break the fever without breaking the child. You watch her work, slow, precise. The same hands that were nearly arrested this morning now coax sweat from a boy's forehead. When the fever breaks, the mother begins to cry. I don't care what they say, she whispers. You saved him. The midwife says nothing, but after they leave, she stands taller. You ask her why she never defends herself. They don't need my defense, she says. They need my presence. You think about that as you crush a dried mint into a bowl, about what it means to stay in a village that might turn on you at any moment, to heal people who might one day accuse you, To risk everything for the chance to help someone just once, die with their eyes held open by someone who cared. Historians call this resilience, or martyrdom, or stubbornness. But you're beginning to understand. It's love, not the soft, sweet kind, the gritty, unsung kind, the kind that survives gossip, survives silence, survives centuries. That night, the wind howls, the roof groans, and for the first time, you realize this work doesn't make you safe. It makes you real. The next morning arrives with a different kind of tension, not the quiet, creeping unease of rumors or the fatigue of too many births, but the thick, humming silence that gathers before a storm, one made not of rain, but of people. You're barely dressed when a boy runs to the cottage, breathless and pale. The council, he says. They've called her. Market Square. Now. The midwife doesn't blink. She sets down her pestle, wipes her hands, and reaches for her darker shawl, the one with the stitched hem that hides more than dust. She nods for you to follow. You carry nothing. She carries everything. The square's already full when you arrive. Faces you know. Some grateful, some suspicious, many unreadable. The air feels carved from stone. In the center, a table has been set like a courtroom, though there is no judge, just a priest, the local bailiff, and a merchant's wife with eyes like frost. The priest speaks first. You've been called not for a crime, but for clarity. The midwife nods once. She does not bow. You were present at 3 recent deaths, the priest continues. One of them involved a woman of advanced age, found with dried herbs on her tongue. She couldn't swallow, the midwife replies. I made a poultice. The merchant's wife leans forward. And who gave you the right to act without the church? No one gives me the right, the midwife says. I take the risk. A murmur ripples through the crowd. The bailiff steps in. There are concerns that your knowledge exceeds what is natural, that some of your herbs carry more than healing. They all do, she says. Healing and harm live side by side. That's why I measure. The priest frowns. And who taught you to measure? My grandmother, and every woman who didn't die screaming. Silence. You feel it now. How easily this could shift. A word, a look, the wrong memory stirred. She stands alone. You want to step forward, but she catches your eye and barely shakes her head. Not now. A woman in the crowd raises her hand. She helped me, she says. My child would have died without her. Another speaks. She buried my stillborn with prayers when no one else would come. Then, unexpectedly, a man. My wife bled for 3 days. The doctor was drunk. This woman saved her life. The merchant's wife hisses. You want gratitude to replace law? No, the priest says slowly. But we also don't want fear to replace truth. Historians still argue whether these community tribunals were more performance than justice, whether their real function was control. Keep women in line, keep men in power, but sometimes they served as mirrors, and the village had to look at itself. After a long pause, the priest speaks again. No charge will be made, but you are warned. Warned of what? The midwife asks. That if a 4th death follows your presence, without witness, without priest, without permission, you will be held. For being present, she asks, or for being needed? He doesn't answer. She nods and turns to leave. The crowd parts slowly, not reverently, not resentfully, just warily. At home, she doesn't speak for hours. She grinds herbs, cleans tools, scrubs the floor so hard her hands go raw. Finally, she says, It's not the deaths they fear. It's that I saw them happen without them. You understand. It's about control, not of life, but of knowledge. If a woman dies and no man sees it, no priest blesses it, no scribe records it, then it becomes folklore. And they hate what they can't name. Fringe tidbit. In parts of medieval France, a law required that a priest be called within 30 minutes of a birth or a death, or both would be considered suspicious. Midwives often ignored this, citing practicality over piety. Some were punished, others simply never reported the timing at all. You ask what would happen if she stopped. She looks up. Then more women would die, and their deaths would be clean, legal, and forgotten. You write that down in your mind, but the words ache in your chest. That evening, a girl comes quietly to the door. She's not crying, but her eyes are red. She doesn't speak. She just places a bundle in the midwife's hands and backs away. Inside the cloth, a knife. Small. Ornamental. Blood on the hilt. The midwife doesn't ask who or why. She wraps the blade in a linen pouch, sprinkles dried sage over it, and places it in the fire. You watch the metal blacken, hiss, warp. You never saw it, she says. You nod. This is what it means to be trusted and feared. Light joke number 11. A midwife once said the worst part about healing a village wasn't the pain, or the blood, or the risk of being accused. It was pretending she liked the bread people brought as payment. You think after delivering their 6th child, they'd at least add salt. You both laugh, but your hands are shaking. Later, she shows you her private journal. Not names, not dates, just symbols. A circle with a cross, a square with a crack, a spiral. What do they mean? Stories I can't say aloud. She runs her fingers over a spiral. This one was a woman who loved a girl. They kept it secret until her father found out. She drank fennel and wormwood until her womb forgot how to bleed. I never saw her again. You ask what happened to the girl. I buried her comb in the garden. That's all she left behind. You go outside and find the garden. The mint is strong tonight. The wind colder. You wonder how many things have been buried here, how many memories she couldn't speak, and now you understand why she never begs for understanding. Because too much truth sounds like guilt to those who've never held pain in their hands. Before sleep, she hands you a small stone. Flat, dark, smooth. For what? Wait. She sees your confusion and adds, there will be nights when you need to hold something that doesn't bleed. You take it. Grip it tightly. It's cool, real, anchoring. And in that moment, you finally feel it. Not just the knowledge she's given you, but the weight of being the one they turn to when things fall apart. The one they sometimes thank. The one they might one day burn. And still, the one they need. The days grow colder, not in a seasonal way, but in the kind of creeping chill that settles between people. You feel it at the well, where conversations pause when you pass. You feel it in the way doors close just a little faster than before. You feel it even in silence, when the village pretends not to need you, but they do, because the next call comes at midnight. As always, a knock. Not frantic this time, but deliberate. You open the door to find a man holding a woman in his arms. Her face is twisted in pain, her hands clutching her belly, her skin pale and gleaming with sweat. Blood has soaked through her skirts. It started early, he says. She wasn't due for another month. The midwife steps forward, takes the woman from his arms, and leads her inside without a word. No questions, no blame. You know what this is. A hemorrhage, a premature labor, a race against blood and breath. You boil water, lay cloths, open the window just enough to let the heat out and keep the spirits away. The midwife checks the pulse. Faint, thready. Then her fingers press the belly. The baby is coming, but something is wrong. You can feel it in the way her hands hesitate. Cord, she mutters. The umbilical cord has dropped first, cutting off oxygen. There's no time to explain it to the husband. There's no time to explain it to anyone. You press down on the woman's chest as instructed. The midwife works, hands swift but not rushed, like someone performing a ritual they've done 100 times but still dread every time. And then the baby comes, blue, silent. You feel your own lungs tighten as if your breath has been stolen too. The midwife clears the mouth, the nose, rubs the chest, nothing. Then, finally, a sound, faint, croaking, but there, alive. You want to weep, but the mother is still bleeding. Her body convulses, her eyes roll back. The midwife mutters a chant, something halfway between prayer and instruction, and pours a tincture between the woman's lips. You press a hot cloth against her abdomen. The bleeding slows, then stops, just barely. The baby is alive. The mother is breathing. You both are shaking. The man has not moved. He stands in the corner, white as ash. The midwife hands him the baby. Take him, she says. You've done all you can. He leaves the room with a nod that's more of a tremble. When it's quiet, she sinks to her knees and stares at her hands. That should have failed, she whispers. You sit beside her. But it didn't, you say. She doesn't reply, because failure still lingers in the walls. Historians still argue how much of midwifery was science and how much was ritual, how much was intuition passed down from experience, and how much was trial and error dressed in confidence. But in rooms like this, the line disappears. It's all ritual. Because what else do you have when blood pours faster than reason? Fringe tidbit. In certain regions, midwives would place an iron key beneath the bed during labor to unlock the womb. Some said it worked. Some said it was nonsense. But even now, you wonder if you would have placed that key under tonight's bed, just to feel less helpless. You sit in the dark together, no candle, no fire, just the warmth of two people who've seen something impossible survive. Then a whisper. Do you think they know? Who? You ask. The mothers. How close it always is. You don't answer, because you're not sure they want to know. The next morning, you deliver the aftercare herbs to the woman's home. She's resting, pale but alive. Her husband looks at you differently now, not with suspicion, but with the stunned humility of someone who's seen death, pause at the threshold and decide, for reasons unknown, not to enter. He tries to pay you. A pouch of coins. Heavy. You look to the midwife. She shakes her head. Keep your money, she says. Build a cradle. He nods again, this time without trembling. You walk home through a quiet village, but it's not silent anymore. There are eyes watching, and not with fear, with something closer to reverence. This is the danger. You tell the midwife as much. She smiles. Being hated is easy. Being revered is what gets you killed. You write it down. Later that day, a letter arrives, delivered by a scribe's apprentice. The seal is wax, pressed with the mark of a noble family from the nearby estate. The message is simple. The lady requests the midwife's presence. Preparations must begin. You pack the satchel. She changes into her cleanest cloak. This time, she allows you to come without hesitation. The manner is tense. Servants move quickly, heads down. The lady lies on a silk-covered bed, breathing slowly, one hand on her stomach. Her eyes meet yours, not pleading, not frightened, prepared. She knows it's gonna hurt, the midwife murmurs later, out of earshot. She just doesn't know how much. The labor starts that evening, quietly at first, like a secret being passed between women in a room full of men, then louder. The lady's screams echo through stone halls, where no one dares comfort her. Nobility has its own kinds of isolation. No sisters, no aunts, only strangers and the weight of expectations. The midwife is calm. You follow her lead. The child is positioned well. No complications, no bleeding, no danger. But the lady fights it. She clenches, resists. It must be perfect, she whispers between contractions. I must give him a son. You understand. The midwife does not humor her. It will be what it is, she says. And when the baby finally comes, wet, healthy, loud, it's a girl. You brace yourself, but the lady doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She only stares. Then she says, wrap her well. The midwife does, hands her over. She'll need a name, she says gently. The lady pauses, then, Alund. It means image. No one in the manor understands, but you do. Light joke number 12. A midwife once told a noblewoman that naming her child after a saint would bring divine protection. The woman chose Saint Anthony, patron of lost things. The boy disappeared at age 6, only to be found asleep in a cupboard. The midwife claimed it worked perfectly. As you leave the manor, the lady doesn't thank you, but she nods, slowly, and you nod back. Respect. Cold, but real. You walk home under stars that feel sharper than usual. The midwife doesn't speak for a long time. Then she says, the powerful think they suffer less, but their pain is just quieter. You reach the cottage and find the hearth still warm. You add wood, strike the flame, and sit in the growing glow. Tonight, there's no crisis, no birth, no death, just breath and silence. You press the weight stone in your pocket and feel how heavy the quiet can be. The next days pass in uneasy calm. No deaths, no births, no frantic knocks before dawn. But you've learned by now that peace is not to be trusted in this life. It is only the moment when tension breathes in. You spend your time cleaning the herbs, rewinding the thread, trimming the ends of old linen. The midwife takes longer walks than usual, speaking to no one, always returning with empty hands and a fuller face. You ask once where she goes. She shrugs. Places that still remember the names no one speaks. Then she adds, "You'll have your own places soon." You wonder if that's a threat or a blessing. On the third morning, a letter comes. No seal, just a folded piece of parchment, damp with dew. Inside, a single sentence. "Come alone. Bring what you brought her." The midwife reads it, folds it, burns it. Then she begins packing. You don't ask questions. You've learned the rhythm of this ritual. The bundle, the vial, the cloth to cover the mouth if someone screams. She tells you to stay. You don't argue. But you stand at the door as she walks into the gray morning mist, and something in you sinks. She returns hours later. Her hands are shaking. She didn't want to live, she says, unprompted. You wait. But she didn't want to die alone, either. She pulls off her cloak, tosses it to the floor, and sits by the fire. She bled slowly, almost politely. You sit beside her, say nothing. "Do you think we do wrong?" she asks. It's not a trap. It's a true question. You answer carefully. "I think we do what no one else will." She nods. That's what frightens them. Fringe tidbit. In certain remote villages, women who took their own lives were not buried in churchyards. But if a midwife sat with them during their final breath, said the right words, sprinkled the right dust, the priest would sometimes forget the rules. You think of what was in that bundle. Pennyroyal, sage, the black root that must be boiled thrice to lose its sting. You wonder how many deaths are made softer by hands that were trained to welcome life. That night, a knock. Not desperate, not polite, official. The bailiff stands at the door. You're summoned. This time, not to market, to the church. You walk together in silence. The pews are mostly empty. The priest waits. A few council members line the walls. An inquiry, the priest says. Not a trial. Not yet. You both know what that means. The merchant's wife is here again. She speaks first. You've made yourself essential. That's dangerous. The midwife says nothing. You've buried too many, she continues. You've touched what should be left to priests. You've whispered to the dying in tongues we don't understand. The midwife tilts her head. Do you want me to stop? A pause. It lasts too long. No, the priest admits, but we must know how far you'll go. The midwife leans forward, as far as they bleed. You know then that she will not be burned. Not yet, but she will be marked. A new rule is made that day. All future deaths must be witnessed by a second party, someone male, someone appointed. No more quiet departures, no more window signs. The village accepts it, relieved. You and the midwife walk home in silence. You ask what she'll do. I'll keep going, she says, but now I'll teach you faster. The days that follow blur. There's no time to reflect, only to remember. A child with a dislocated shoulder. A woman who can no longer stand. A man with swelling in his legs that won't go down. You mix poultices, you bleed the foot, you boil water. The midwife corrects you once, then never again, because the work is no longer hers alone. Light joke number 13. A midwife once said that when a man faints at a birth, he should be given a boiled onion, not for healing, but to keep him from telling the story wrong later. You laugh when she tells you this. So does she. But the laughter's cracked. You've seen too much to laugh fully. That evening, she gives you a knife. Small, dull at first glance, but sharp enough where it counts. This is for cutting cord, she says, and for the other things, if you must. You don't ask what the other things are. You already know. The next night, the lady from the manor sends for you. Not her. You. Alone. You ride up under a sky choked with clouds. She meets you in her chamber, reclining again, but not pale this time. Composed. Curious. I heard it was you who saved the last breach, she says. You don't respond. She smiles. I want to offer you something. Land, a stipend, a title, herbal matron of the house. Official, controlled, safe. You pause. Then you ask her, and what happens when I do something you didn't authorize? She doesn't blink. Then you'll lose what I gave. You leave the manor without the offer. Back home, the midwife is waiting by the fire. Well, she asks. She wants to own it, you say. She always did. And then she says something you weren't ready for. You're ready. It's not a compliment. It's a sentence. You go outside to breathe and find, hanging on the door, a ribbon tied in 3 knots. The sign. Someone needs help. Quiet help. You bring your satchel. You don't knock for permission. Inside, a woman lies curled on the floor, eyes wide, breathing fast. She's not in labor. She's in panic. Her lover has left. Her body is shaking. She hasn't eaten in days. She thinks she's dying. You hold her. You brew broth. You whisper nothingness until she sleeps. You leave without being thanked. You don't need it. That night, the midwife asks nothing. She only hands you a ledger. Blank. Your ledger now. Start writing, she says. And you do. Not just the births, not just the deaths, but the spaces in between. The things no priest records. The women who didn't die, but were never the same. The men who apologized too late. The children who arrived without being wanted and grew into people who carried that silence like a birthmark. You write it all, and in doing so, you become something else. Not her shadow, her successor. You wake before dawn now, not because anyone calls, but because something in your bones begins to stir before the sun even lifts its head. The midwife doesn't knock on your door anymore. She knows you'll already be up, lacing your boots, packing the satchel, checking the herbs like they might whisper back if they're ready. The village looks different when you see it this way. Not as a place to live, but a place to tend. Each house no longer just a structure, but a patient. Each family, a heartbeat. And you, strangely, one of the few who remembers where it aches. The midwife says little these days. She lets you speak more, lets you decide the doses, the pressure, the pace. Once she stops mid-preparation and stares at you a moment too long. You ask if something's wrong. No, she says. I just realized I don't need to follow you anymore. That hits harder than praise. You both go to the river that morning. Not for water, but for memory. There's a place she's never shown you until now, where smooth stones are stacked in deliberate towers, 5 or 6 tall, silent sentinels beside the flow, each one marked faintly with a symbol, a line, a cross, a spiral, a flame. What is this? You ask. Those I couldn't save, she says. She doesn't kneel, doesn't pray. She just stands and listens to the current like it's speaking a language only midwives are born knowing. You build your own stack. 1 stone. Just 1. You don't say for who. She doesn't ask. Fringe tidbit. In some ancient customs, midwives would leave a bowl of milk at the river after a death in childbirth. Not as a sacrifice, but as a promise that softness still exists, that not all things have to be sharp to survive. Back at the cottage, a woman arrives on foot, clutching her stomach and crying. She says nothing, only lifts her skirts enough to show the blood trailing down her thighs. You guide her inside. The midwife lets you take the lead. The bleeding isn't too far gone. Not yet. You brew bark tea, press the root poultice against her skin, elevate her legs with folded cloth. You remember to whisper her name, not to wake her, but to remind her that she is still here. She survives. When she opens her eyes and sees you, her first word is not thank you. It's why? You say, because you asked, and that's enough. Later, as she sleeps, the midwife hands you a small token, a carved button made of bone, with a hole too small for thread. What is it? Your first soul returned. You wear it around your neck, inside your shirt. You feel its weight more than the string. The days continue. The leaves fall, and with them, the pretense. You are the midwife now. Not in name, not officially, but everyone feels it. People knock and ask for you. They hesitate when she answers. The whispers say the old one is fading, that the new one is faster, gentler, or colder. You are not sure which you want to be. One night, you return from tending a fevered child, only to find her by the fire, staring into a pot she hasn't stirred. "I'm not long for this," she says. You freeze. I feel it. Not pain, just distance. You kneel beside her. She doesn't touch you. "I won't make you promise anything," she says. "But when I go, let it be quiet. No priest, no spectacle, no burning oils or dramatic tears." You nod, because anything else would be wrong. She hands you a letter, unopened, sealed with her own stitching pattern. "When the last candle goes out, open this." She doesn't explain. You tuck it into your ledger. 3 days later, she's gone. No suffering, no final words, just a stillness you recognize immediately, a breath that never comes. You sit beside her for hours. You clean the body, you braid her hair, you place lavender behind her ears, not for beauty, but to remind the room that someone cared. You bury her yourself. No one helps. You don't ask them to. Fringe tidbit: in a few rare records, midwives were buried with their hands tied loosely with thread, so they wouldn't be tempted to continue working in the next life. You do not tie hers. Let her work, if she wants. Afterwards, you open the letter. Inside is no farewell, just a list of names. Names of those still in the village, and the ones she feared might need you soon. And at the bottom, a final line. There is no lineage unless you carry it. You carry it. You carry it into the next house, where a woman in her 40s labors late and hard. You carry it when her son comes feet first and nearly takes her with him. You carry it when she weeps and whispers that no one wanted this, not even her. You stay anyway. You carry it when the church requests an audience and you decline. You carry it when the merchant's wife looks at you in the square and no longer meets your eyes. You carry it when a child born too soon opens his eyes for 3 full minutes and then never again. You carry it when you help wrap him in cloth and bury him at sunrise. You carry it when you write nothing of that day in your ledger, only a dot beside his mother's name. Light joke number 14. A midwife once said her most common tools were a blade, a bowl, and a lie. The blade to cut, the bowl to catch, the lie to make the pain feel smaller than it was. You think about that. You sharpen your blade, you clean your bowl, you refine your lies. Not cruel ones, the useful kind. She'll wake soon. This isn't your fault. He cried once, I swear. All true in their own way. And when people ask where the old midwife went, you just say, she went softly. Then you go back to the herbs, back to the births, back to the bleeding, and the ledger in your hands grows heavier, not with names, with presence. You are no longer learning how to be the midwife. You are learning how to be the silence that follows her. The wind changes, not the weather, though it cools, but something deeper. A shift in how people open their doors, how they meet your eyes, how they speak your name. No longer with uncertainty, no longer with reverence, but with familiarity. The village has begun to forget that you were once an apprentice. Now you are simply the midwife. You don't correct them. You don't feel proud. You feel older than you are. You notice things more than you used to. The way women sit on the edge of benches with one hand pressed against their belly. The way men glance away when their wives speak too firmly. The way children flinch at thunder, or laughter, or silence. You've learned that the body often speaks long before the mouth does. You spend the week tending to fevers, binding a broken wrist, and brewing a sleep tonic for a woman whose husband returned from war and hasn't spoken since. She thanks you with bread and a carved button. You accept both, as always. The church remains distant. The new priest is younger, less wary. He blesses your work when he must, but only in the corners of sentences. You pretend not to notice. You prefer it that way. One morning, the lady from the manor sends for you again. This time not for labor, but for discretion. You find her in the garden, standing by a cluster of foxglove and bonewort, eyes red from something she won't admit. "I need your help," she says, but her voice holds no command, only fear. You follow her into the manor, through the back corridors into a smaller chamber. There in the bed lies a girl no older than 16, pale, shaking, eyes wide with shame. "She's a cousin," the lady says. "Too young, too foolish." You don't ask whose child grows inside her. You already know the answer. You feel it in the way the girl flinches at every creak of the door, in the way her hands curl into fists against her own stomach. "She wants it gone," the lady says softly. The girl doesn't speak. You set down your satchel and begin preparing the tea. There is no magic in it, just math, the right ratios, the right temperature, the right pressure on the back of the tongue. You ask the girl only one question. "Do you want this?" She nods. That's all you need. The lady leaves you alone. She can't bear to witness it. The girl drinks, then sleeps. You watch her chest rise and fall for hours. It doesn't take long. The pain comes in waves. You hold her hand. You place the cloth beneath her. You whisper nothing. Because nothing is the only honest comfort. When it is done, you clean the linens. You don't let her look. The lady returns just before dusk. She places a velvet pouch in your hand. Gold. You give it back. "She'll need fennel. And company." The lady nods. And then, just as you're about to leave, she speaks again. "What if I said it was my son who did this?" You stop. You do not turn. "I would say nothing," you reply. And you walk out. Fringe tidbit. In certain noble households, midwives were called upon not only for births, but for covering them. If a child was born under the wrong stars, or to the wrong father, the midwife might be asked to mark the ledger with silence. Whole lines erased by omission. You return to the village with the weight of another secret resting just beneath your ribs. It joins the others. There's a whole shelf inside you now for things that cannot be said. The next day, a boy is born breech in a cottage near the mill. His mother, a weaver, bites her lips so hard during the birth that she cannot speak for hours afterward. You stitch her gently, explain the poultice, set the baby near her chest. She weeps, not from pain, but from disbelief. You understand. You eat dinner alone that night. Stewed carrots, bitter broth. The midwife's seat across from you is still empty. Will always be. You talk to her anyway. "I understand now," you say softly. "It's not the births or the deaths. It's the space in between." You feel the warmth of the fire, the ache in your legs, the sharp, iron-scented memory of the girl from the manor still lingering in your nose. You do not cry. There is no time. Light joke number 15. A midwife once told her apprentice, "If you ever cry during a delivery, just say it's the herbs. If you cry during a burial, say it's the wind. But if you cry for yourself, do it alone." You sleep fitfully that night. Dream of doors opening to empty rooms, of babies with no mouths, of herbs that whisper your name. You wake before sunrise. There's a knock. Not loud, but urgent. You dress in silence. It's a man this time, older, eyes red, beard streaked with rain. His wife collapsed. She's cold. Not dead, but not far. You follow him into the woods, past 3 streams, to a shack barely standing. Inside, the woman lies curled, face gray, lips cracked. She's miscarried. Far along. There's blood. A lot of it. You kneel. He cannot look. You work. You grind bark with one hand, pack the bleeding with the other. You whisper her name over and over again until she stirs. She doesn't speak, but her eyes open. She survives. Barely. The husband grips your wrist as you stand to leave. "She's all I've got." You nod. That night, as you walk back alone, you wonder how many women owe their lives to hands like yours, and how many men owe their grief to the same. You write nothing in the ledger that night, only place a dot beside her name. The 16th this month. You do not sleep. The next morning, the village wakes to rumors. The manor's lady has left, disappeared in the night. No message. The cousin too. You hear the whispers. Some say they went to the coast. Others say they joined a convent. One woman claims she saw the lady riding west with a soldier at her side. You say nothing. You remember the tea, the silence, the velvet pouch. You tend to a birth that afternoon. Smooth, easy. The child comes before you even finish preparing the cloths. You smile. It's rare. The mother laughs. You look tired, she says. I am, you reply. But I'll keep going. Because someone has to. And because the ledger is not yet full. The snow arrives earlier than expected. Not in a flurry, but in a quiet drift. As if the world has decided to lower its voice for a while. You wake to a world muted in white. The garden is frozen, the river slowed, the herbs in the window frost-kissed and brittle. Even the village itself seems unsure of what to do with this silence. But you are not idle. Winter is the season of waiting, of loss, of long nights and deeper stories. Fewer births, more fevers. Less bleeding, more forgetting. In these months, your work shifts. You become less a midwife and more a keeper of the weak. The calls are different now. A boy with frostbitten toes, a girl whose cough won't stop, a woman who whispers that she cannot bear another cold season without something to warm her from the inside. Not tea, not blankets, but a reason. You brew broths and wrap bandages. You sit beside fires in houses where the wood is too damp to burn cleanly. You hold the hands of people who cannot speak above a whisper, not because their lungs fail them, but because grief has filled the space where breath used to live. The snow buries everything except the truth. You walk to the mill one morning to check on a baby born last month. Early, fragile, uncertain. The father meets you at the door with a look that says more than words. Inside, the cradle is empty. The mother sits beside it, not crying, just humming. The baby was warm last night, cold this morning. You wrap the child in cloth. You whisper a name, even if they never gave one. You don't record it in the ledger, just a mark, like a crescent moon. You stay for a while, not to speak, just to keep the silence from becoming unbearable. Fringe tidbit. Some midwives in remote villages kept a special cradle for stillborns, never used for the living. Just a small wooden box carved with the names of children never named. They believed that even if the child never breathed, it still needed a place to rest. You think about building one. The next week brings more of the same. Fevers that rise and break and rise again. A fall on the ice that leaves a hip shattered. A stillbirth in the east field that almost takes the mother with it. You sleep less, eat less. The village sees it. One morning, you find a basket outside your door. Inside, bread, a shawl, dried cherries, and a note. For your hands, which never stop. For your heart, which we forgot to thank. No name. You cry. Not for the gift, but because someone remembered. Later that evening, an old man arrives at your door, wrapped in wool, holding a bottle of something thick and sweet. I have no ailment, he says, but I don't want to die without saying thank you. You offer tea. He stays an hour, tells you stories about the wife he buried, the son he lost, the war he survived. At the end, he places a button in your hand, carved, smooth, warm from his skin. Give it to someone who needs it more than I ever did. You place it on the shelf, next to the others. It is beginning to look like an altar. Light joke number 16. A midwife once said that every button she received was a life she didn't have to bury. Some women collect coins, she said. I collect the things people forgot they owed me. You start keeping track. This winter alone, 6 buttons, 3 shawls, 4 loaves, 2 letters, and 17 births. Only 15 survived. The 2 who didn't are buried by the river, beneath trees that no longer grow leaves. You visit sometimes. Say nothing. Just sit and remember. One morning, a messenger arrives from a neighboring village. Their midwife is ill. They need help. You pack your satchel without hesitation. The village is smaller than yours. Colder somehow. Not in temperature, but in welcome. People glance, but do not speak. They send for you when needed, close their doors behind you when you leave. You deliver 2 children there, 1 boy, 1 girl. Both survive. You save a woman with a fever so fierce her breath steams in a room already boiling. You make a salve for a burn. You drain a boil from a shepherd's back. You stay a week. When you leave, no one says goodbye. But there's a pouch tied to your satchel when you reach the riverbank. Inside, dried lavender, a silver coin, and a small folded scrap of parchment. Come back, please. You don't, because your village still needs you. But you remember them. You remember all of them, and your ledger grows heavier. The snow thickens, the work slows. You take time, finally, to mend the hem of your cloak, to oil your knife, to sort the herbs by name rather than use. You clean the ledger's cover, you polish the bowl, you rest your hands in hot water. Then you sleep, a long, deep sleep, and dream of the old midwife again. She says nothing, just nods, and presses a button into your hand. In the dream, you finally ask, "What do I do when they stop calling?" She smiles and says, "Then you teach." You wake with tears in your mouth and an idea in your hands. You go into the village that morning and visit 3 homes. You speak with 3 girls, different ages, different lives. You ask each of them the same question. Do you want to learn how to keep others alive? 2 say no. 1 says yes. You give her nothing. No book, no title. Just a sprig of yarrow and a small cloth to carry it in. She understands. The winter begins to lift, slowly. The snow melts from the edges inward, and in its place, soil. Soft, dark, waiting. You plant new herbs. You rewrite your ledger's first page. You open the window, and you listen for the knock, which always comes. Because someone always needs you. Because this is not a story about endings. This is a story about carrying blood, carrying pain, carrying names, and handing them, one day, quietly, into another pair of waiting hands. Spring returns, not in full bloom, but in cautious signs. A sprout in the herb patch, a crack in the river's ice, a child laughing somewhere without coughing first. After months of huddled quiet and whispered grief, life begins to stretch again, slow and stiff like old bones waking. You stretch too. Your hands ache in the morning now. The cold still lingers in your joints, and your back speaks more than it used to. But you keep going, because healing is not a youthful act. It's a practiced one. The girl who said yes to learning comes by again. She brings her own cloth now, her own sprig of mint, and her questions. So many questions. You answer none directly. You answer with actions. How to boil water before the herbs go in. How to listen for the kind of silence that means fever. How to tell the difference between fear and pain. One day she asks, "What happens when someone dies and you couldn't stop it?" You pause, then say, "You stay until they're gone." She nods, as if this is both too much and still somehow not enough. You wonder if you looked like that once. A week later, a mother goes into labor on the far edge of the village. You take the apprentice with you. She's nervous, but hides it well. You let her carry the satchel. Inside, the house is warm, loud. There are 4 other children. A grandmother pacing. The father wiping his face every 5 seconds with the same cloth. The labor is fast. The baby is eager. Within an hour, a boy is born, slick and squirming. The mother laughs before she even sees him, purely from the shock of relief. You let your apprentice cut the cord. Her hands shake, but the cut is clean. Later she whispers, "Is it always this easy?" You smile once, sadly. No, but you don't say more. She needs to feel this victory. You won't steal it. You return home to find a note wedged under the door. No name. Thank you. I didn't know who else to ask. Inside is a necklace with a carved bead. Bone, not wood. You don't know who sent it. You don't try to guess. You hang it beside the others. You're running out of wall. Fringe tidbit. Some midwives believed every carved trinket, every button, every token of gratitude was a kind of spiritual payment, not for services, but for silence. An unspoken pact. You saw me. You helped me. Now, forget what you saw. You don't forget, but you carry them gently. The apprentice asks, Do you believe in ghosts? You answer, only the living kind. She doesn't press further. She's learning. Later that month, a fever spreads through the village. Not fatal, but heavy. Tired eyes, labored breath. It hits the children hardest. And the men, as always, pretend it doesn't. You and the apprentice visit 13 homes in 3 days. By the 4th day, you haven't slept. By the 5th, you cough. She notices, offers to finish the rounds without you. You almost refuse. Then, finally, you nod. She goes. You rest. Only for an hour. You wake to her voice at the door. It's bad, she says. The tailor's boy isn't breathing right. You throw on your cloak and follow her. Your legs feel heavy. Your chest rattles when you breathe. But still, you go. The boy is no older than 4. His chest rises shallow. His lips are dry. The parents stand nearby, helpless. You kneel. You mix honey with thyme. You lift his head. You whisper to him. He opens his eyes. You stay the whole night. He lives. You return home and collapse. The apprentice tucks you in, makes you broth, boils your cloths. She even whispers your name when she thinks you're asleep. You are not, but you let her believe you are, because care is learned by giving, not by watching. Light joke number 17. A midwife once told a young man that if he helped carry hot water for a birth, the baby would grow up to have his nose. He refused. The baby still looked just like him. The mother never said a word, but her sister did, loudly. The next week, the priest sends a request. You're surprised. He asks you to bless a sick infant in a family too poor to afford christening. Not to baptize, just to hold. To whisper something. You go. You hold the child. Whisper no name. Just a promise. Stay if you can. If not, be light. The baby lives, and the priest nods at you as you leave. It's not forgiveness, but it's respect. Maybe that's more honest. You begin to notice more signs of the apprentice's growth. She organizes the herbs by potency, not name. She boils before you ask. She writes her own notes. You ask if she's ready for a name. She says yes. You give her one. Not yours. Hers. She smiles. You add her symbol to the ledger. A spiral. Same as yours, but drawn counterclockwise. She belongs to the same current, but will swim differently. And that's good. That's right. One night, the air turns colder again. You sit by the fire and hold the ledger in your lap. It's thick now. The corners are soft with touch. The ink smudged in places. You read names you remember. Names of women who bled and survived. Women who bled and didn't. Children who cried. Children who didn't. You remember them all. Even the ones you promised to forget. You close the book and lean back. The apprentice asks if you're all right. You say, yes, then pause, then add, but I'm not finished. She nods, because she knows. The work never ends, only shifts. One day you'll hand her the ledger, and she'll start her own, but not yet. Tonight there's still breath in your lungs, still weight in your hands, still quiet in the world that only you know how to hear. And that quiet, that's the part that lasts. You no longer need to knock when you enter homes. Doors open before your hand reaches them. People part without prompting. There's a rhythm now, a kind of silent music, and you walk in time with it, always just early enough, never too late. This is what happens, you realize, when presence becomes part of the fabric. You stop being noticed, and you start being trusted. But trust is a heavy thing. It arrives one afternoon in the form of a writer. Dust on his boots, a letter sealed with red wax. He hands it to you wordlessly and waits. You open it by the hearth, the apprentice nearby grinding marjoram. The words are sharp, elegant, from the high steward of a distant estate. They request your presence for the Lady Aveline, gravely ill, heavy with child, and unwilling to trust anyone else. The midwife's name was passed along, yours. You prepare to leave. The apprentice does not protest. She packs the kit without being told, places the ledger beside your cloak, then she touches your hand and says, "Don't forget your stone." You take it. The road is long, days winding through forests and rain. You ride with a letter tucked into your sleeve, repeating the name, Aveline, a name that sounds expensive, fragile. The estate rises like a stone out of the hills. Too clean, too still. You're shown in by servants who speak only when pressed. The walls whisper, velvet, polished wood, and tension. Aveline lies in a massive bed that dwarfs her. Her belly rounds beneath the silk. Her eyes are sunken. Her hands are cold. You greet her softly. She does not reply, only nods. She hasn't spoken in 3 days, the steward explains. But she listens. You'll know. You believe him. She watches you. You begin your work. The baby is not ready, but her body is tired, worn. There is something wrong. A stillness too deep. A silence too wide. You ask for boiling water, linens, broth. You grind herbs, test for fever, examine the slow rhythm of her pulse. There is no rush, and yet everything is urgent. You sleep in a chair beside her. You wake to her eyes watching you, wide and wet. She whispers, "You came." You nod. She touches her belly. "He won't cry." You say nothing. You know she's right. The next night, her pains begin. Not sharp, not bright, just slow, endless. You labor with her. There's no screaming, no pushing, only waiting. When the child comes, he is still, perfect, quiet. You wrap him gently, place him beside her for a moment. She doesn't cry, only nods once as if confirming something she already knew. Then she closes her eyes and does not open them again. Fringe tidbit. In noble houses, stillbirths were sometimes hidden, buried quietly, unnamed, unrecorded. To acknowledge them was to accept failure, but midwives always name them, if only in their minds. You do the same. You call him Emmerich. And her? You already know her name. You prepare the bodies. You don't stay for the burial. They offer gold. You leave it. You return with a new weight, a button made of ivory, and a lock of hair tied with ribbon. You place both in your box. Then you write, Aveline, circle crossed with flame. The apprentice sees the line and says nothing. She brews tea, adds extra honey, places it in your hand, then sits beside you, quiet. The work continues. A woman in the East Barn goes into labor. Third child, rich again. You guide her through it. The apprentice holds her hand. A man falls from a tree, his arm bent wrong. You reset the bone. He thanks you with cider and a song. You write none of that down. Not everything needs ink. Light joke number 18. A midwife once claimed that if a baby sneezed within 5 minutes of birth, it meant they'd be honest and impossible to marry off. Her own daughter sneezed twice. She never married, but became a midwife instead. The apprentice delivers her first child without you 3 weeks later. You arrive too late to help, but early enough to see the grin on her face. She's healthy, she says. The baby or the mother? Both. You don't cry, but something in your chest unfolds. That night, she asks about the ledger. Will you ever pass it on? You hesitate, then say, It isn't something I give. It's something you earn. She accepts that. Later, she writes her first entry. You watch her form the lines carefully. It is not a copy of yours. It is hers. You smile, but the quiet doesn't last. One night, a fire breaks out near the northern cottages. A barn collapses. A boy is burned. You arrive too late to save him. You hold his mother as she wails into your lap. You do not try to soothe. You let her break, because that too is part of the work. The apprentice watches, doesn't move, then brings water, cloth, bread. You do not need to tell her. She knows. Later, as you both sit by the fire, she says, I didn't think it would feel this way. You ask, which way? She says, like carrying ghosts in your chest. You nod, then hand her your stone. Hold it tonight. She does. In silence. That week, a priest visits. Not the villages. A traveler. He asks to speak with you. Says he's heard of your work. He wants to document it. To make it official. You decline. He's surprised. I could record your methods. Ensure your knowledge survives. You reply, It already does. He leaves unsatisfied. You don't mind. Some things are not meant to be written, only passed. The apprentice begins to keep her own book. You don't ask to see it, but sometimes you hear her whisper names as she writes. That's enough. The season shifts again. The garden returns. You plant mint beside the yarrow. She plants chamomile beside the mint. You say nothing, but you smile. The people stop calling you the midwife. They call you by your name. The apprentice becomes the midwife. This feels right, because now, when the knock comes, she answers it, and you stay by the fire. For the first time, you no longer keep the satchel by the door. She does. You no longer sleep lightly, waiting for the knock. She hears it first. You watch her now. How she folds the cloth. How she reads the face of a mother-to-be. How she listens when no one is speaking. She is not you, but she is becoming herself. This, you think, is the final shape of the work. Not doing, but letting. You still help, of course. You still tend to small wounds, prepare salves, teach her how to cut bitterroot the right way so it won't blister the skin. You still grind herbs, mend cloaks, whisper names into the fire when no one is listening. But more and more, your hands are at rest, and hers are stained. She returns one morning with blood on her apron and a lopsided grin. Twins, she says. One girl, one boy. You raise an eyebrow. Alive? She nods. And loud. You say nothing, but later you carve a small spiral into your shelf. 2 new lives, 2 new weights on the world. You begin to notice how people address her now. They ask, can she come by? Not you, her. And when they speak to you, it's different, quieter, as if you're made of something fading, something remembered. You are, and it is not sad. Fringe tidbit. In certain coastal villages, old midwives were thought to carry the sea in their blood, the ability to hold in sorrow like water, then release it when the next came along. Apprentices were called shorelines, the place where all that pain first broke. One afternoon, a child brings you a drawing. It's you and the apprentice standing side by side, holding a baby between you. The baby has 6 fingers. The midwife has wings. You have a crown. You laugh harder than you have in months. You hang it on the wall. The apprentice doesn't laugh. She studies the drawing, then says, you never told me how many babies you've delivered. You think for a long moment. I stopped counting after the ones who didn't stay. She nods. Doesn't press. But that night, she asks you another question. When did you know it was time to stop? You stare into the fire. I didn't. She waits. You add, but my hands knew before I did. She looks at your hands, not with pity, with gratitude, as if they've passed her something priceless, but weightless. That winter, she delivers 3 more babies. 2 without you even knowing she left the house. The 3rd one you watch, from a chair, across the room. She doesn't look at you once. She doesn't need to. When it's over, the mother reaches for your hand. You shake your head gently. She did that, and the mother turns and nods, and something inside you exhales. That night, you open the ledger. You write her name, not as apprentice, as midwife. You date the page, then close the book. Not forever, just firmly. The next morning, she finds you in the garden. You wrote me in, didn't you? You nod. She says, it felt different last night. It always does, you think, when the world finally begins to rest in your shadow. She starts walking differently after that. Slower, more deliberate, not proud, but full. She steps into rooms like they're waiting for her. You don't follow. Not anymore. And the village sees it too. They start coming to her first. And you go for walks. You speak to trees. You write things on scraps of cloth and bury them beneath the mint. Not spells, just truths. Things like, don't forget the ones who couldn't scream. Let her weep before she thanks you. Salt is for bleeding, not bitterness. She finds one of these scraps once, brings it inside. You left this, she says. No, you reply. I left it for you to find. She tucks it into her pocket, and you know she'll carry it for years. One evening, you both sit by the fire with nothing to do. A rare moment. She's cleaning her blade. You're mending the hem of your oldest cloak. She says, do you miss it? You think for a long while. I miss what it asked of me, you say. She waits. I don't miss how much it took. Light joke number 19. A midwife once said the first lie she ever told was, "You're doing just fine." She went on to say it another 1,000 times. It was almost always a lie, but also almost always necessary. A letter arrives the next week from a girl in another village. She heard of the apprentice's work, wants to learn. You say, "It's starting." The apprentice nods. She writes back, invites her to visit. She asks if that's all right. You say, "It's not mine anymore to allow." And you mean it. You wonder if the old midwife ever felt this gentle vanishing, like smoke into air. Not erased, just dissolved. You hope so. It's a good way to go. You spend your afternoons teaching her things she didn't ask to know. The names of birds that cry before storms, which bark draws heat, how to fold the cloth so it doesn't fall apart in fire. She listens, writes nothing, but you know she's learning, because she begins to correct you. Once she catches you mixing the wrong measure of valerian. She says nothing, just raises an eyebrow. You laugh. Old hands, old habits. And that night, you leave the satchel on her hook, not yours, and you sleep deeply, and wake up well. There are still deaths. One in particular, a woman who slips on the ice, pregnant, alone. They call the apprentice. You offer to come. She says, "You'll just watch." You nod, and you do. You sit in the corner as she tends. She wraps the child in cloth, holds the woman's hand as the breath fades. You see her whisper something into her ear. Later, you ask what it was. She says, "I promised her she'd be remembered." You nod, then ask, "Did you name the child?" She says, "Not yet." You say, "You should." And she does. You feel the season shifting again, not in temperature, in time. The girl from the letter arrives, young, nervous, but with something sharp in her eyes. She asks to learn. You step aside. The apprentice, now teacher, begins again. And you? You finally sit. For the first time in years, you rest without guilt. You are no longer the hands. You are the memory of them, the shape they left behind. And you realize something. You didn't stop being the midwife. You just became the one who made it possible for others to begin. The fire crackles low. The tools are polished and resting. The herbs are bundled in their proper corners. No one knocks tonight. No one cries for help in the dark. No baby fights its way into the world. No mother bleeds. No husband paces. No priest whispers suspicion cloaked in benediction. The world, for this small moment, is still. And you are sitting. Beside you, the apprentice, now teacher, writes into her own ledger. Her script is precise, careful, not beautiful, just true. The girl she took under her wing sits opposite her, rolling bandages for the first time. Her fingers are clumsy, but she doesn't stop. You recognize the shape of her determination. You once wore it like skin. You listen as they speak in low voices, not noticing you're awake. "She didn't cry," the young one says, "when the baby came out blue." "She wouldn't," the new midwife replies. "It's not our grief. It's our presence." Does that get easier? No, but you get quieter. They don't know you're listening. You close your eyes and let their voices blend with the fire. Outside, the wind moves softly across the eaves. The season is shifting again. The frost hasn't yet returned, but the air is thinking about it. You can smell the decision in the trees. You think of all the seasons you've seen come and go. All the births, the deaths, the quiet survivals, and all the stories buried beneath them, unmarked, unspoken, but carried. You remember the woman who named her child after a flower no one else could pronounce, the man who sang lullabies to a child that wasn't his, the girl who whispered her own mother's name as she bled, and the grandmother who poured water over her forehead anyway. None of them are here now, but you are. And because you are, a piece of them remains. Fringe tidbit. Some midwives believe that every person they helped leave the world returned in the cries of the next child born, that the scream of a newborn was never new, but old pain, softened and reborn. You've begun to wonder if it's true. The new apprentice glances at you. Will she retire? The midwife smiles. No, she doesn't work anymore. She doesn't need to. But she's still here. The midwife looks across the fire at you. Yes, she says. She is. You meet her gaze. You don't smile. You don't speak. But something moves between you. A quiet vow. You stand, go to the shelf, and take down your ledger. It's heavier than you remember. The cover cracked. The page is worn. You run your hand across the spine, and it feels like touching the back of your own memory. You open to the first page. There it is. Her name. The one who taught you. The one who came before. Her symbol, simple. A single line, drawn firm. You never added an end to it. You still won't. You add one more mark. Beneath your final entry. A loop, closed, complete. Not because the work has ended, but because your hands have finally earned their rest. You place the ledger into the fire. Not as rejection, as return. The pages don't scream. They curl. The ink fades. And you watch until only ash remains. The two others watch in silence. You say nothing. They ask nothing. You step outside. The stars are sharp tonight, clear. You walk to the river. Not fast. Your legs ache, but not in protest. In memory, you sit on the old rock, where the first midwife once sat, where you buried her name in stone, where your apprentice stood with wet hands, full of life and shock and sorrow. You reach into your pocket and take out your final token, a button, wooden, worn. You place it in the dirt, not as a monument, as a seed. Let the earth hold what your hands no longer need. You return to the cottage. They are both asleep now. The younger one curled on the floor, the midwife half upright in her chair. You don't wake them. You add a log to the fire, pour a cup of warm broth, then sit. Your hands are not working. Your heart is not heavy. You're not waiting for the next call, because it will not be yours. Light joke number 20. A midwife once said that when she finally left her ledger behind, the village threw her a feast with bread, wine, and laughter. Then she leaned across the table and whispered to the apprentice, "They'll never thank you like this, but keep going anyway." You smile at that. You were never thanked enough, but you kept going anyway. And now? Now someone else will, because the world doesn't run on kings and councils. It runs on the hands that catch its children, on the voices that whisper comfort without question, on the women who walk into blood and breath and stillness, and carry stories back out with them. You have been one of those women. You still are. You always will be. But you're ready now to become something else too. Not the hands, not the voice, but the memory. And when the knock comes again, and it always will, you will not rise, but you will listen and smile, because someone else will answer, and they will say, "I'm here, let me help."